Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a breathtaking chain of islands in the heart of the Caribbean turquoise waters, lush volcanic peaks, a charming capital city, Saint Vincent and the Grenadines. Feels like stepping into a perfect postcard, right?
It really does. Beautiful place.
But dive a little deeper, and you uncover a history that's surprisingly complex, marked by incredible resilience and sometimes, well, turbulent struggles.
Yeah.
Today, that's exactly what we're doing. We're taking a deep dive into this fascinating nation, pulling insights from a comprehensive historical document you've shared with us.
That's our mission here, to sift through the material, pinpoint the absolute most important nuggets of knowledge,
Yeah.
and give you a really clear picture of St. Vincent and the Grenadines' journey.
Right.
We'll cover everything from its earliest inhabitants and their fierce resistance against outsiders through centuries of colonial conflict and the profound impact of slavery, leading up to its fight for independence and the distinct challenges and, the vibrant culture of today.
And why spend your time with us diving into SVG? Because this nation's story offers powerful lessons about persistence, the intricate blending of cultures under pressure, and how historical events continue to shape contemporary realities.
Absolutely. It's a true shortcut to understanding a place that has truly earns the moniker Sons of the Rock.
Sons of the Rock, yeah, we'll definitely get into that.
Absolutely. So to set the scene, St. Vincent and the Grenadines is tucked away in the Lesser Antilles. It's the southernmost link in the chain known as the Windward Islands.
Okay.
The total land area is about 344 square kilometers, supporting population just over 100,000. The capital, Kingstown, is on the main island, St. Vincent.
And it's not just one island, is it?
Not at all. What really strikes you is the sheer number of islands. It's a chain of over 600 islands and islets, though thankfully most of them are uninhabited.
600. Wow. It makes you appreciate the scale of this archipelago. You've probably heard of some of the more well-known ones in the southern chain, like Bequia, Union Island,
Canoa-na-Mero.
Canoan, Meroe, and Palm Island. These are often the spots that pop into popular imagination.
Right, the Grenadines. And the landscape is dominated by its volcanic origins. St. Vincent itself is essentially a single volcanic mass, incredibly mountainous, covered in rainforest and fertile agricultural land, with La Soufriere being the highest peak.
La Soufriere, the volcano, always looming.
Always. Getting around the islands relies heavily on ferries and cargo boats.
Right. The volcanic nature is key to understanding the main island. It's steep and rugged almost everywhere, except for a few small, flat areas around places like Kingstown.
Exactly. And this fertile, challenging terrain played a big role in its history. The material tells us that before European contact, two groups inhabited the area, the Carib Arawaks and the Red Arawaks, also known as Arawaks or Lucayo.
Okay. Arawaks first.
Yeah. Archaeological finds, like ceramics and burial mounds dating before 1560, confirm Arawak-speaking people were here as early as 2500 BC.
That's really early.
It is part of what archaeologists call the Saladoid culture and later the Wanamite culture.
These were seafaring people navigating in dugouts. Their villages had a distinct round layout.
Right. And most of what we know about them comes from their pottery.
Yeah.
The Saladoid culture, with its finely woven grass cloth impressions.
Interesting.
And the later Wanamite culture, with more elaborate bowls painted with thick pigments. The material notes they didn't use a potter's wheel, just molding and polishing with shells.
Handcrafted.
Precisely. The Wanamites seem to have faded from the Lesser Antilles by AD 1300, though some integrated with the Caribs, and their artifacts show up as far south as Grenada.
So then came the Caribs.
Then came the Caribs, arriving later and displacing the Arawaks. By the late 1500s, their reputation for ferocity had definitely preceded them in Europe.
I bet.
They lived an agrarian lifestyle, cultivating crops like manioc, yams, sweet potatoes, maize, and tobacco, supplementing this with fishing and shellfishing.
A mix of farming and fishing.
Yeah, and the division of labor was quite specific. Women handled crop harvesting, while men focused on hunting and fishing. What's insightful here is how these practices fostered surprisingly democratic and egalitarian societies among them.
Democratic. That's interesting. And what really stands out from the material is their absolute determination to resist from the very beginning.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They earned the name Sons of the Rock for their mastery of guerrilla tactics against early attempts by the Spanish, French, and British to settle.
Sons of the Rock. There it is again.
There's a specific mention of a Spanish attempt in 1511 led by Peter de Luna that completely failed due to native resistance.
Failed completely.
And the Caribs were apparently considered much superior to the Spanish in naval combat at that time.
Wow, superior naval skills against the Spanish. That is telling.
It really is. And there's a poignant, if unusual, detail about how they honored their fallen warriors. A valiantly fought dead Carib would have their body bound in cotton and richly adorned with shells and fish bones.
Speaks volumes about value and courage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The island's Carib name, by the way, was Ulamain.
Ulamain, got it. This resistance, though, it was tested repeatedly, wasn't it, as European powers tried to claim Saint Vincent?
Constantly. Columbus arrived in 1498, giving it its current name, but the Caribs quickly repelled that first Spanish landing.
Kentham packing.
Pretty much. Then, the French made serious colonization attempts starting in 1627 under the Compagnie des Îles de l'Amérique, bringing in monopolies and enslaved people. But these early French efforts crumbled under sustained Carib attacks that destroyed their settlements.
So the Caribs held them off.
For a long time. Brief Spanish, British, and Dutch attempts also failed. Even the famous pirate Morgan tried to settle briefly along the leeward coast before being forced to flee.
Even Captain Morgan couldn't stick around.
Nope. The list of failed French expeditions by names like Molin de la Montagne, Valette, and Fraisier really underscores the effectiveness of the Carib defense.
But eventually, the French succeeded.
Eventually, yes. They finally established a settlement in 1719, after the British had also faced setbacks in dealing with the Caribs.
And once the French were entrenched, St. Vincent became an incredibly valuable sugar colony for them.
Hugely valuable. But this created immense friction. The material highlights the growing social, political, and territorial tensions between the white settlers and the Caribs.
Especially over land, I imagine.
Exactly. Especially as the French encroached on the Caribs' crucial hunting grounds. This simmering conflict exploded in 1795 into a major rebellion led by Bitchy and his brother.
A 6-year rebellion.
6 years. The material describes them fighting in a formal style not usually seen regionally. This uprising lasted until it was finally crushed by the British in 1801.
So the British take over?
Following several shifts in control, yes, British power became firmly established by the early 19th century. And this period saw the full-scale implementation of the sugar plantation economy.
Sugar becomes king.
Absolutely. The British saw sugar as far more profitable than tobacco or cotton. We learned about the plantocrats, the powerful plantation owners and smaller proprietors importing vast numbers of both indentured servants and, crucially, enslaved Africans.
And the numbers were significant.
Huge numbers. Between 1774 and 1807 alone, a massive number of African captives were landed, primarily from the Gold Coast and Slave Coast regions, often captured during raids or as spoils of war.
The material includes some really difficult details about the arrival of enslaved Africans, doesn't it?
It does. Very grim. Being held in castles or barracoons, the horrific journey. Upon arrival, they were inspected, washed, smeared with oil.
Dehumanizing.
Utterly. There was even a practice of decoying them with liquor and using trumpeters and intelligent individuals to try and extract information from the new arrivals.
Just awful.
It paints a very clear, unsettling picture. Once sold, they were dispersed onto plantations, and the material notes the significant resistance faced by overseers from the enslaved people themselves.
Resistance continued even then.
Always. The plantation system grew rapidly. 65 plantations in the late 1770s, early 80s, soaring to 85 sugar estates by 1785. Exports shifted towards the U.S. and British West Indies by 1807-1808.
And the planters' justification for this brutal system.
As presented in an 1800 petition to Lord Hawkesbury, it was framed in terms of economic expediency. They argued they needed a large, cheap labor force for the fertile soil.
Claiming other labor wasn't working out.
Right. Claiming indentured laborers were unreliable and the existing enslaved population had high mortality and low reproduction rates. They stressed the whole development plan was fragile without a continuous influx of enslaved Africans.
Basically, profit over humanity.
That was the core argument. They even mentioned inhabitants fearing the arrival of New World slaves. The bottom line was that an economy with such extreme mortality couldn't afford to stagnate if it had ambitions for growth.
But despite the overwhelming power of the plantation system, resistance continued. The indigenous Caribs, as we saw, were the first line of defense.
And their struggle carried on through the series of conflicts known as the Carib Wars in the 19th century. The material details their methods: direct armed confrontation, effective guerrilla warfare, and evasion.
They didn't give up easily.
Not at all. England claimed Saint Vincent in 1763, but actual settlement didn't begin until 1765, when Fort Saint Vincent was built. The British tried negotiating and bribing them into submission. But the material points out the Caribs' wisdom in valuing peace over short-term gains. Still, conflict was inevitable. Hostilities broke out again in 1771 and 1774.
And the Caribs had some success.
Initially, yes. They nearly wiped out the British at Fort Saint Vincent and even rushed into Kingstown. The material mentions the siege of Brandy and the Carib chief Garifuna.
Garifuna?
The final desperate struggle happened in 1778. Garifuna died, and by 1801, organized resistance was crushed. Many Caribs were expelled to islands like Balasso. Some who fled were pursued, captured, or killed. The survivors transported elsewhere.
A tragic end to that chapter of resistance. But it wasn't just indigenous resistance, was it?
No, absolutely not. But what's really critical to understand is that the material reveals detailed planning for slave revolts as well. A major mainland rebellion was planned throughout the 1760s.
Led by?
Leaders were Tanyan, a runaway enslaved man, Cujo, a Carib convert, and Gino, a maroon captain. Their goal was a widespread revolt.
Ambitious.
Very. This plotting led to a conspiracy to assassinate the governor in 1770, planned to coincide with him sailing to a banquet. Two rival enslaved men apparently saw it as their chance.
But it was discovered.
Yes, the plan was discovered when a letter from Tanyan was intercepted. Kingstown went into lockdown, and although there were clashes, the revolt was ultimately suppressed.
Another attempt thwarted.
And the material identifies the 1795-1796 revolt as the most significant.
Why that one specifically?
Because its crushing ultimately resulted in the final removal of the organized Carib population and cleared the way for the British to fully colonize the Grenadines. Tensions were already high, the British deeply suspicious of the Garifuna population involved.
And there was a plan.
Yes. A Garifuna woman named Rebecca played a role, helping formulate a plan to capture the governor and burn settlements. But, like the earlier plot, it fell apart when an enslaved individual, not part of the conspiracy, revealed it to the authorities.
History repeating itself. So this long, brutal period of resistance and control, it reaches a turning point in 1834.
A pivotal moment, yes. The emancipation of enslaved Africans throughout British colonies, including Saint Vincent and the Grenadines.
Freedom, finally.
Here's where the material uses powerful language. It describes this emancipation as a false and hollow freedom.
False and hollow. How so?
Immediately, new laws were put in place with harsher penalties, essentially reintroducing slave codes but under different names. Emancipated people having just gained freedom forfeited the rights and privileges of free men.
So they were free, but not really.
Exactly. Plunged into a more hard-pressed state than even under slavery in some aspects. The material gives examples. Using threatening, abusive, or insulting language became a misdemeanor punishable by 14 days hard labor.
Unbelievable.
The immediate societal impact was the creation of a new structure. A free population, yes, but largely landless, forced into wage labor on the same plantations.
So still dependent on the planters.
Largely, yes. The population was described as demoralized, lacking systemic support. Economic woes like crop failures added to the misery. Tensions persisted, even among poor whites struggling for resources.
But people didn't just accept this.
No. One of the very first collective actions of the newly emancipated people, according to the material, was to build independent sites of worship and call for their own native leaders.
Asserting their spiritual independence.
And cultural identity. This period saw the emergence of a new philosophy and militant postures that would influence behavior for decades.
And economically, what happened right after abolition?
It was tough. Plantations were abandoned, work stopped. The former enslaved laborers didn't see sugar as a natural free crop. Early labor contracts were agreed upon, often demanding necessities and rum. Rum was often part of the payment or provision. But widespread grumbling and whimpering continued. By late 1834, far fewer contracts were signed than planters wanted. Labor treaties in 1835 were difficult, marked by obstinacy, and rebellion was widely expected.
So freedom didn't automatically fix the economy?
Not at all. The Sugar Islands struggled for labor and production. Even well-intentioned contracts often led to disappointment. It was a very difficult transition.
Okay, moving into the 20th century, the path to self-governance starts to take shape.
Yes, heavily influenced by the growth of trade unions in the late 1940s and 50s. Associations formed for teachers, civil servants.
Organizing.
Exactly. The material highlights a pivotal, large political meeting in Kingstown on February 5th, 1951. That paved the way for the launch of the Saint Vincent and the Grenadines Labor Party, SVLP, just 2 months later, on April 10th, 1951.
Led by Reverend E.R.D. Motley.
That's right. And this party gained rapid popularity. It was crucial in building political representation and organization.
So Motley's party really energized things.
It did. While the material notes Mullen's party laid some groundwork, Motley injected real vigor, a more radical approach. The party built a national structure, held public meetings, organized demonstrations against government policies.
Covering a range of issues.
Everything from library materials and education to unemployment and housing. Motley himself, though, was eventually exiled after losing a court case.
Wow. But the movement continued.
Yes, all part of a growing regional push for political reform, universal suffrage, self-government, ultimately independence. The British Caribbean Commission even advocated for territories to form a federation.
And SVG was involved regionally?
Actively, in bodies like CARIFTA and the OECS. Initial steps towards formal constitutional change came with commissions in 1960 and 1963.
Was there enthusiasm for independence then?
Interestingly, the material notes these commissions initially found a lack of interest in independence, though it does question if this truly reflected the public mood or just, a limited perspective from the commission. Political leadership at the time is described as somewhat weak.
But the independence movement gained momentum later.
Definitely. Driven by trade unions and political campaigns focused on self-governance and pressing social concerns like housing, education, health. The labor movement's political arm organized mass protests became dominant.
But it wasn't smooth sailing.
No, full independence faced roadblocks despite steps towards limited self-government. A significant setback was a referendum on independence held on February 7th, 1976.
And?
It was narrowly defeated.
Narrowly defeated. Wow. That must have been a blow.
Huge. That date is now commemorated as Conflict Day. The material even mentions the resignation of the figure called the Father of Independence due to fears of instability.
But the process wasn't stopped entirely.
No. Despite the setback, new constitutional proposals were drawn up. Independence was finally achieved in October 1979.
Finally independent.
Yes. Though the material mentions a UN peacekeeping force was sent in March 1980 after Prime Minister Milton Cato was ousted. But it also says SVG has had political stability with regular elections since '79. So a bit complex right after independence.
And the flag and anthem came earlier.
Interestingly, yes. Adopted October 27, 1977, before the official independence date.
Huh. So the first prime minister forms the government, fiercely contested elections.
Right, and a point of pride mentioned is that this newly independent nation hosted the first heads of government meeting, including New World states and non-aligned nations, gave it early international stature.
Making its mark quickly?
Yeah. Early governance was a parliamentary democracy, Westminster model, constitution effective October 27, 1979, bicameral parliament, House of Assembly, Senate appointed by the Governor General, who has a ceremonial role.
And the political system.
Multi-party, with the new Democratic Party, NDP, and Unity Labor Party, ULP, being the main forces.
But the early post-independence years were tough.
Very challenging. Economic struggles, social discontent, rising crime, engagements with international financial institutions, and structural adjustment measures.
Those often controversial economic policies.
Exactly. They faced fierce opposition. Political parties opposing nationalist policies also emerged from older groups.
Okay, looking at the modern political landscape, parties formed early on.
Really began forming in the late 1930s, early 40s, alongside universal suffrage and labor organizations. The SVLP emerged as the sole labor representative, one in 1945, later formed the basis of the NDP after some internal splits.
And post-1979,
debates around government-civil society relations, freedom of expression concerns, the winner-takes-all electoral system is noted as influencing political dynamics.
Now, the material details recent elections, right? Reporting neutrally.
Yes. The ULP, led by Dr. Ralph E. Gonsalves, first came to power in 1994, winning 14 of 15 seats. They'd split from the original Vincentian Labor Party back in '74.
Dominant win.
Very. They won again in 1998 with 12 seats.
But 2001 was controversial.
Extremely. ULP won 12 seats, NDP won. But the material notes the initial count favored the NDP and was overturned. Strong claims of irregularities, fraud allegations, issues with election agents.
And missing ballots.
Yeah, a significant controversy over postal ballots from overseas voters that reportedly disappeared and remained uncounted for over 8 years.
Wow. That's serious. What about 2005?
The material suggests that election hinged heavily on leader character. The NDP candidate seen as forthright, the PM seen by some as arrogant. High expectations for an NDP win. ULP noted as trying to stir dissent against party rebels, even implying foreign interference.
And the result?
Described as a closely contested victory for the ULP. Again, controversy allegations of voting equipment tampering. The NDP pushed for an independent investigation. The issue reached the OAS.
So contested results were a recurring theme for a while.
Seemingly so. Since then, though, the ULP under Dr. Gonsalves has continued its success, winning in 2015, and a historic 5th consecutive win in 2020.
Quite a run. Okay, shifting to the economy. Agriculture and tourism are the big ones.
That's right. Primarily agricultural, but tourism is a major growing sector. Like many developing nations, it faces challenges with economic uncertainties, poverty,
And the volcano.
and the ever-present threat from La Soufriere caused that major eruption and disruption in 2021.
Let's talk agriculture first. Crucial for jobs.
Absolutely. Crucial for employment and exports. Strong tradition of family-owned small farms, predating emancipation. Many still practice subsistence farming.
Bananas were big ones.
Historically, yes. Saint Vincent was a major producer, but the industry suffered significantly when the preferential trade system with Europe ended.
That loss of guaranteed access hurt.
Big time. Other crops include coconuts, root crops, vegetables, fruit trees. Sugarcane has diminished. Commercial horticulture is important for export, and the material highlights the significant role of women in family production of vegetables and fruit trees.
Good point. And tourism, clearly key now.
Definitely recognized as key. Brings vital income, jobs, drives development. Tourists arrive mainly via cruise ships near Kingstown or Bakia, yachts exploring the Grenadines, or by air.
And there's an effort towards responsible tourism.
Yes, a stated effort to balance culture, environment, and local quality of life. The material points to substantial recent job growth in tourism, hotels, staff, road construction.
The new airport must be a big factor.
Major investment. The new Argyle International Airport opened late 2021, expected to facilitate direct flights from the UK, North America, managed by a state-owned consortium.
And other developments alongside it.
Bolstering cruise tourism, accommodation like eco-lodges, marketing. High expectations, hopes for tourist arrivals to double by 2030.
Doubling arrivals.
Ambitious. Very. There's a specific target for cruise tourists to spend at least $100 locally. Though the material notes SVG isn't a formal cruise destination with its own berth, rents the yacht harbor.
So adapting, what do tourists do?
Visiting botanical gardens, hiking La Soufriere, chartering boats, exploring hidden beaches, enjoying live music.
Sounds idyllic, but challenges exist.
Of course. Media reports mention a perceived lack of cultural heritage presentation in rural areas.
Yeah.
Environmental degradation, rising oil prices, climate change impacts, all threats. The very nature of the tourist relationship being consumption-based is called a dilemma.
Interesting point. Okay, shifting gears to social issues. Education.
Universal primary is free and compulsory. Secondary is free, but not yet universally accessible, despite efforts.
How's performance?
Equal between genders at primary. Boys tend to perform less well in secondary, partly linked to attendance. Girls show greater investment, overrepresented in tertiary.
Gaps remain, though.
Yes. Early childhood services are limited. Achievement gaps persist for marginalized groups, disabilities, poorer households. Facilities and materials can be inadequate.
What about technology?
New focus on ICT, but universal internet is a challenge. Need for more special ed teachers, ongoing professional development, consistent code of conduct application.
But literacy is high.
Very high, 96.5%. System follows the British model, standardized teacher training, common entrance exam. Mix of public and denominational schools. Public schools use a neutral curriculum but often taught adhering to denominational traditions. Funding mix of government and churches.
And the local language issue.
Yeah, the material notes Creole isn't taught, and teachers sometimes discourage students from speaking it. Creates a bit of a disconnect.
Healthcare next. How's it funded?
Primarily through government revenue, free at the point of use. Limited private care. Ministry of Health oversees it, but services face pressure from rising demand.
How is it structured?
6 health districts, 43 health centers, 2 polyclinics. Teams usually include a nurse practitioner, community health aide. Facilities include 1 main hospital, clinics, psychiatric and geriatric facilities. Protocols exist for common diseases. Community health aides do outreach. Comprehensive primary healthcare plan aims to expand access, especially rurally.
But access issues remain for some.
Yes. Material points out issues for vulnerable groups, disabilities, isolated communities. High adolescent fertility rates, compounded by social norms and gender-based violence, GBV, are a significant concern.
And GBV is being addressed.
It's a focus of programming, yes. But the material notes approaches to social protection, poverty, child welfare, GBV, adolescent issues are somewhat fragmented, lack coordination.
Other big social challenges.
Migration and youth unemployment are persistent problems. The material lists promising policies. Formal social protection, better data gathering, GBV legislation, youth development initiatives.
What about youth unemployment rates?
Material gives past figures. 18.5% overall in 2001, 18% youth unemployment in 2003. Agriculture employs over 30%. Commerce government also significant. Unemployment is a major problem, worsened by the banana industry decline.
And other related social issues.
Teenage pregnancy, crime, substance abuse, family disintegration are mentioned.
Are there programs targeting these?
Yes, several government programs aim at youth vulnerable groups. Youth Cadet Corps for at-risk youth, community service program as alternative to incarceration, offering trade training, youth and adolescent skills training program for 16-29-year-olds, technical business training, homemaking for young mothers, entrepreneurship support.
Specific training for farmers, too.
Yes, for young farmer shepherds and school leavers not farming. Narcotic abuse prevention program focuses on drug education, especially high schoolers. Programs for at-risk youth rehab, dropout prevention. Family Children's Services Division runs Family Life Ed, teen affiliate clubs, collaboration on a school expansion program, too.
Seems like a lot of initiatives trying to tackle these issues. Now, the environment. SVG is very vulnerable.
Acutely vulnerable to climate change. Its location, small size, mean high exposure to extreme weather. Serious detrimental effects, financial impacts, infrastructure damage, risks to life.
Specific events mentioned.
The 6.4 magnitude earthquake on October 27, 2021, power outages, damage, water loss. Other hazards like volcanic eruptions, landslides, floods worsen things.
And the terrain adds to the risk.
Yes, the mountainous terrain intensifies exposure to hurricanes, flooding, threatening lives, buildings, roads, farming land. Damaged roads make areas inaccessible.
Is there monitoring?
Yes, active monitoring by government and NADMA, National Disaster Management Agency. Public education info sharing, using external weather radar. Designated refuges exist. But these events can hit GDP hard.
And the volcano threat is constant.
Severe, ever-present. Due to the island's formation, magma chamber. Potential impacts are dire deaths, destruction of Kingstown, billions in infrastructure losses, historical pattern of eruptions, then long dormancy, like La Soufriere 1902-1979. Scientists are actively monitoring.
Climate change overall is a huge threat.
Material paints a stark picture. Threatens to push countries like SVG into chaos. Impacts economic growth, stresses society, undermines social order, justice, equality. Small island developing states, SIDS, face unique vulnerabilities.
Especially as developing countries are less equipped.
Exactly. The most harmful potential outcome highlighted is loss of socioeconomic stability from ecosystem erosion. Specific threats to aquatic, coastal marine ecosystems disruptions, food web changes, invasive species, erosion, potential decline of fish stocks is critical. Ocean acidification, sea level rise.
But there's some capacity to adapt.
Interestingly, yes. Assessments show severe physical exposure, but relatively high adaptation capacity. Understanding this balance is key for risk management, building resilience.
Other climate impacts.
Human security concerns migration, resource conflicts, loss of vital services, undermined governance, critical infrastructure, vulnerable to extreme weather, water scarcity, cyclones, sea level rise in urban areas, fire risk.
Okay, let's look outward. SVG, on the world stage, plays an active role.
Surprisingly active for its size. Participates in numerous international organizations. Joined the UN in 1980. Member of CARICOM, Caribbean Development Bank, OAS, IDB, IMF, World Bank, ITU, WHO, ECL. Held positions on councils like IMO, IS, ITU.
Maintains wide diplomatic relations.
Yes, with major players like China, US, regional partners like Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Caribbean neighbors. Notes mutually beneficial cooperation with UAE, South Korea, and award-winning relations with Qatar.
And its foreign policy stance.
What's particularly noteworthy is SVG's stated commitment to neutrality, explicitly mentioned regarding international conflicts, Middle East, Central America, independent territorial disputes.
A principled neutral stance.
Seems so. Highlights pacifism, welcoming UN conflict resolution, endorsing dialogue, sanctity of life, rejecting ideologies, promoting wars, or importing external worldviews into international relations. Supports Commonwealth work, too.
Can you elaborate on the regional groups?
CARICOM. Right. Roots in the Organization of Caribbean Unity, OCU, from 1965, aiming for a single market. Revised treaty established CARICOM in 1983. Objectives: economic integration, cooperation, larger economic space, enhancing growth, maximizing internal trade, fostering external relations. Structure includes Summit of Heads of Government as the highest body.
And the CDB and OECS?
Caribbean Development Bank, established 1969, operational 1971. Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS agreement, signed 1981, incorporated Anguilla, Guadeloupe, Martinique associated, notes socioeconomic disparities and the issue of dependent areas. It also mentions neutrally reporting the source, SVG recognizing Martinique Guadeloupe independence and requesting measures against diplomatic relations.
Interesting detail. Global partnerships. UN is key.
UN is the cornerstone of foreign policy, peace, security, welfare, environment. Supports various UN agencies, Commonwealth, OAS, CARICOM, LBA, non-aligned movement.
What about UNDP?
That partnership is highlighted as central to socioeconomic development. Provides more technical assistance than any other partner except Venezuela. Over $28 million dispersed since 1995. Specific support for things like the census, rural appraisals, coastal management projects.
Okay, let's shift from global engagement to local expression. The culture sounds vibrant.
Really rich and diverse. You see it in the lively music, dance, artistic, culinary traditions. Strong Afro-Caribbean influence. Dance is essential for celebration and expression.
Festivals are big.
Hugely important. Vinci Mass, the national carnival in July-August, is particularly significant. A vibrant celebration, street parades, music, costumes, national pride.
Other festivals, too.
Lots. Carib Country Festival, the Kingstown Nettle Vodka Festival.
Nettle vodka, really?
Apparently. Celebrates local distilleries, prizes. Also the 9 Mornings Festival at Christmas, Dive Fest, boat regattas.
Tell me more about Vinci Mass.
Specific events like Devi Monday, Carnival Tuesday with Pretty Mass, Jouvert morning parades, bikini bands, parties, calypso competitions. It's huge.
And Old Year's Night.
Costumes, fireworks, Jouvert with outrageous costumes. There's also an annual immigration reunion weekend in July, performances, racing. These festivals boost tourism, community pride, competition, and some have social welfare goals like medical missions.
Music and dance have deep roots.
Very deep, drawing from varied historical influences. Music is woven through life. Traditional music includes instrumental dance pieces, songs simple, repetitive, melodic, using metaphor. Traditional dance rhythms used in songs for community, family events, rites of passage.
And chantwells.
Performers of rhymed, rhythmical verses celebrating figures or events, past and present. Early 20th century brass bands were important. Late night a cappella folk singing was common. Christmas New Year traditions had string bands, folk singing, old year song sessions as community critique.
A lot of informal learning.
Yes, musicians often learned and excelled by ear, improvisation. The material circles back again to the Creole language issue, vital culturally but not taught, sometimes discouraged in schools.
Did the music evolve over time?
Big shift in the late 50s, 60s. Musicians transcribed rhythms, international exposure brought new forms. School music programs developed. A school of music was established for formal training. Calypso tents improved better performance, lyrics.
And more recently.
In 1990 saw a surge in professionally arranged produced music, wider genres, especially from younger performers, greater artistic excellence. There's an Association of Music Professionals Festival, Festival of Voices for choral music. West African influence is key to folk dances like bongo, cha-cha, quadrille. A recent festival of music and arts in schools emphasizes folk culture.
Sounds like a lively scene. Finally, the food reflects local resources.
Absolutely. Abundant fish, local produce, spices. Heavy influence from enslaved Africans, cornmeal porridge staple, fried plantain common. Lunch might be roast beefish, tomato salad, rice peas, boiled dumplings.
French and English influences, too.
Definitely. Bouillon soup, callaloo, curries, bread with lunch dinner. Rice is common now, historically puddings. Sweets from tropical fruits, cinnamon, coconut, vanilla, rum flavors.
Local drinks.
Local rum, homemade rum punch, sea grape wine. A unique specialty brewed from ginger herbs. Soft drinks from local fruits, known more for pungency than sweetness.
Any special food occasions.
The traditional harvest festival in May involves village feasting, giving thanks. Traditional delicacies, pig, goat, poultry, fish, seasoned, locally served at festivals, christenings, often with rum or Carib beer.
Is this food available generally?
Hotels offer versions, maybe changed for tourists. But the material says, village festival food has a stronger, traditional flavor, often cooked communally in public yards. Carib beer, local specialties, festivities, all part of the gestural social life, the ways people connect through shared traditions.
Well, that was quite a journey. We've gone from the geology and earliest resistance through centuries of colonial struggle and slavery's impact.
To the complex path to independence and exploring modern economy, society, environmental issues, global role, all drawn from the material you provided.
You've just received a truly comprehensive deep dive into this fascinating nation. It really highlights how those centuries of history continue to shape St. Vincent and the Grenadines today and into the future.
Absolutely. So after exploring SVG's story, its remarkable ability to resist powerful empires,
Yeah.
navigate that difficult transition from forced labor to nationhood, and now face these huge environmental threats alongside modern challenges, it leaves us with a key question to ponder. How do small island nations like this one successfully balance preserving their unique cultural identity and hard-won independence
Yeah.
with the realities of engaging in a globalized world and confronting challenges that demand international cooperation?
That's a big question, something to think about until our next deep dive.